what I would love to have is a quick sort of summary of each of your funds' prospective focus. And I know that each of them is very unique. And then from there, what I'd like to do is go in and start talking about the actual economy. So, James, why don't you talk about obvious and what's obvious about it?
That's great. I think I'll probably be the first mic to request mic two. So we always have a pun come up, within 60 seconds talking about obvious ventures. But it's a new fund that I had the pleasure of co-founding with Evan Williams of Blogger and Twitter and Medium fame. And we started Obvious Ventures with a simple idea, and that idea was that there were little to no venture funds focused on companies that combine profit and purpose, that do what we call world positive entrepreneurship. And this is not social impact investing, it's not corporate philanthropy, it's the idea that you can use technology and you can build solutions to really systemic challenges in the world. Things like climate change, chronic disease, student outcomes, income inequality, and we have a thesis that those companies are going to deliver great financial returns. They're also going to deliver enormous positive impact by solving those big challenges. So that's what we're focused on.
Okay, and Will?
So I'm the founder of Market Capital. 3 years ago, we started out as an accelerator, and about a year and a half ago, we kind of expanded our kind of charter to include seed investing in Los Angeles. Our portfolio is about 70% Southern California and 30% Northern California. And really what we try to do is take the Silicon Valley style seed investing, which is very operationally focused on kind of value-added capital, taking that model and moving down to Southern California where there's a lack of venture capital, B, lack of seed stage venture capital, and really just lack of capital that comes with more than just money to really help entrepreneurs build and scale their businesses.
Great. Rick?
So at Comcast, I focus on consumer internet, consumer mobile, marketplaces, on demand. And I think the question I get most often when folks look at my portfolio, which consists of companies like Instacart, Shuttle, Flightcar, Hired, is why the heck is Comcast investing in these businesses? This is not a digital media play. And our fund is set up, and it's been around for 16 years now, since '99. So we're a corporate venture fund that's been in the game for a while. But it's set up from the start to really be a financially driven fund. So we look for areas where we can make outsized financial returns, but investing without forgetting who we are and knowing that we have strategic assets behind us, those being the assets of Comcast and NBC Universal, that we can bring to bear and really drive companies' growth going forward. And that could be Comcast NBC becoming a customer for a number of our portfolio companies, or using Comcast NBC as a distribution channel, a way to drive growth. So it's quite a fun place to invest from, and we do Series A and Series B deals mostly.
Great. And Rob?
So Exceed Capital is an early stage micro VC fund. We manage $110 million across two funds. Similar to Marker, we are very engaged with our portfolio companies at the earliest days. We make all of our initial commitments at the seed stage, and then we follow on in the Series A and the Series B. We look for companies that have technology as the key differentiator, and in particular where that can disrupt a market or focus on an enterprise that can make the enterprise faster, cheaper, smarter, more efficient, more effective, where technology can really kind of upset the way things are being done today, such that that becomes the differentiation in the future. We invest in a lot of companies that come out of universities, Stanford, Cal, CMU, MIT, et cetera.
And it's a technical focus with the
fund.
Yeah.
All of the companies we invest in have a strong technical differentiation.
Wonderful. So let me go ahead and start with the major sort of thesis here, which is that the on-demand economy is up and coming. It's just kind of becoming a marketplace with a significant amount of capital, a significant amount of revenue coming out of it. And we've got some of the unicorns like Uber that are coming in and basically taking everyone's money. And then we've got some folks that are coming in and trying to catch up with what's left. And when we talked today about this market developing, we basically had 4 or 5 trends or topics that sort of repeated over and over again when it came to sort of establishing how these companies can find success and real scale and growth. And a few of them were things related to the way that the companies are actually structured from the get-go when it comes to thinking about the resourcing of HR and the employees. Are we really going to be a 1099 economy for everybody? Is that really the one that makes the most sense? And then we also talked about things like how much runway is a company really requiring in order to be able to take off from the ground, and when do you actually throw the towel in and call it quits? And given the fact that we're in a crazy environment where things are changing so fast with load, How are you guys thinking about these types of things? And specifically for this case with the runway, you are talking to companies that are young and exciting, and they are really ambitious, and they really are looking forward to having their company be the $50 billion company as well. What are some of the thoughts processes that you go through your head to make sure that you've got the same sort of mentality? Rob, why don't we start with you?
So we look at this space as the continued deconstruction of delivering products to customers. And so really it's just a question of who owns the asset in the various parts of the value chain. And we think that applies to consumer and into the enterprise. And so in Web 1.0, we talked about disintermediation, where we just believe we're now seeing that in the physical world. And so we look at it from a technology perspective of how can things like smartphones and networks allow people to deliver things more effectively and efficiently. When you're starting in the early days, we're looking for proof along 3 vectors. Market risk, technical risk, and execution risk. Now, as Exceed, we love technical risk. Good engineers hopefully can solve a problem. Execution risk, we try to help our companies find teammates to help them build the team. It's market risk that is the biggest risk. Can people buy your product? Will they buy the product, and how much will they pay for it? So we work with our entrepreneurs to try to have very measurable milestones, build a budget to hit those milestones, put in a buffer because your forecast is always wrong. It's going to take you longer and cost you more, and then we try to fund to that.
Right. And is that sort of the similar thinking? I know that with Obvious that the vectors necessarily when it comes to thinking about the way that you folks invest, you've got people power is one of the major parts of the way that you think about it. You've got healthy living and thinking about that. And then also I think the other one was sustainable systems. And as long as you can decipher the way that that company wants to identify themselves into one of those 3 buckets, I'm imagining that that's a conversation that you can have. Is that kind of the process?
I think so. I mean, we get excited about the myriad of companies that are showing up in this on-demand economy. We have one of our portfolio companies that spoke here today, BreezeWorks. Matthew Cowan was on a panel. That's an example for us of a people power company. It's helping independent service professionals and small businesses grow, build their brand. We think that's good for the U.S. economy. That's world positive, right? We probably wouldn't fund an on-demand donut delivery service, although it could be very profitable. But we probably would do something like, one of the participant companies, Heal, that's doing doctor on demand, right? The idea that the smartphone is this IP-connected supercomputer that's giving consumers just a better customer experience for products and services. Some subset of those will fit our world positive lens, and we'll get excited about those. And then we'll ask all the hard questions you're asking about customer acquisition, runway, and just do the core economics of the business make sense?
Great. I think, Mitch, you had a question come up?
James, is there a discount for world positive companies in terms of your expected returns?
Absolutely not. We actually think the other way around. We think they're going to have lower customer acquisition costs, longer lifetime value, and they're going to have easier employee recruiting and retention. So we think there's some inherent financial advantages to these companies.
Great. Well, we talk about unicorns and we all sort of chuckle at it, but there are some really highly valued companies in the space right now, and some folks say that it's very justified and validated, and that this is the brave new world that we're moving into. Let me ask you, are we necessarily in a perfect storm where it's not only the smartphone penetration, it's not only the fact that the technology is becoming a lot more accessible, it's not only that we've got large corporations coming in and trying to be a part of the community. Is there something special happening right now in the moment in time where this type of on-demand sort of marketplace can sort of blossom? Why didn't this happen 10 years ago?
Well,
answer the question of life while we're at it.
Yeah. The last part of the question is actually probably the hardest part, but I think it's generally accepted by the panelists here and in the VC community that smartphone penetration has essentially changed how consumers really view instantaneous satisfaction and access to both data and services and information, right? And Uber was just one of the first to kind of get out that door, and multiple categories are kind of going through that same kind of transformation. The issue here is that not a lot of businesses should be Uberized, right? So a lot of businesses where there are long-term relationship between the service providers and the consumers, a marketplace might not be successful in disintermediating that relationship perpetually, right? So all of a sudden they become more of a lead gen business than a transactional business.
Right.
And as this kind of funding cycle kind of take into momentum around C-stage investing in kind of on-demand economy, you're going to quickly see probably in the next 18 months, some of these companies realize that they are unable to retain their consumers as effectively as what Uber has done. And the industry will bifurcate somewhat between kind of businesses that should really just be lead gen, right? So more like care.com versus those that are transactional and truly kind of value added on every transactional basis like Uber.
And that brings up an interesting point. There's a couple of startups that are working in the world of, they're still on demand, but they're not Uberizing. And an example that comes to mind is that there's a company called Operator, and there's another one called Genie that you guys might be familiar with, that they employ a smartphone and there's no app. It's just a phone number. And you send a text message to it, and it will send you whatever you ask for. And behind the scenes, there's probably some great workflows taking place. A lot of folks are running around. They made a conscious decision that they were going to actually have that be their sort of main interface. And what I wonder is, are we? I'm trying to make sure here. Are we getting to a place where we're going to start to see the mobile phone and the mobile experience make it so easy that basically it just becomes a push button for any type of service that you're looking for? Because Will, it sounds like what you're saying is that a lot of these lead gen folks, very verticalized, very specific, and have domain expertise about whatever it is that they specifically do. And the sort of missing link has been that it's super accessible for the consumer to access them now. Rob, let me ask you that. Or actually, yeah, Rob and Rick, we'll split that.
Sure.
So I think that a couple things to break apart. The first is the changing behaviors, which are absolutely going to happen. One of the things Mary Meeker talked about in her report 2 weeks ago was that people are always carrying their phones with them at all times, even at their house. And as a father of 3 teenagers, I think that it's become an extension of the arms of all 3 of my children at all times. And like trying to get the phone away from them even at night is literally a battle. And watching my students at Stanford, where I teach, the kind of the 26 to 36, the phones are always with them. So the behaviors, that's changed, and it's going to change. And as these people get older, that's just going to continue to happen. To your point earlier about the perfect storm, I think we need to confuse how behaviors are going to change and the old world is gone and the new world is coming versus a cycle of cheap capital, low interest rates where capital is flowing in and looking for returns. And some of these companies are worth a tremendous amount of money and will hold their value, and some of them won't. And if you've been around the valley long enough, you know that these cycles come and go and the pendulum swings, and we'll have a pullback at some point in time. But real behaviors are changing, and what it will be like in 10 years will be even different than what it is today.
And Rick, would you say that's the same?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer that Rob gave, and hopefully folks in the audience were recording when Will gave his answer, because I think that was like the perfect textbook answer to the question, really hitting it on all fronts. What I would just add would be that it's changing for the consumer, and the phone has become an extension of everybody's arm, even wrist, right, where it's just part of you. That will become increasingly so going forward. But that's also on the back end what enables the businesses to provide the service too, because now the mobile workforce is connected at all times, has all of the information they need to meet those high customer expectations and to provide services that they just couldn't do before, but now they can do it mobily in a fully connected 24/7 time.
Absolutely, and that touches against, and Rob, you brought that point up as well, that this generational shift that's taking place, it's not only happening on the consumer side where people are, the millennials, watch out, that they're basically changing the way that everything's happening on the consumer side, but what I imagine is that a lot of your founders are going to be part of that cohort as well, and what I wonder is, are your conversations changing because of the same behavioral shift? James?
It's an interesting question. I don't know if our conversations with founders are changing, but I think how they think about delivering their product and service to their consumer just fundamentally changes. That the assumption that the post-PC mobile phone and tablet becomes the screen. And they think more about that. They often develop for that first. And then developing for laptops and PCs becomes a secondary part of the puzzle.
Right. And Will, is that, when you're talking to these seed companies and we're looking at sort of how they position mobile and the experience, is on demand, is load, is this sexy sauce that we keep talking about, is it actually coming up that often, or are these conversations a lot more about, I'm an expert in this particular subject or this particular thing, and I want to get some seed capital to go and make this happen?
I think all VCs need and does invest bottoms up. Right? They look at the problem, the solution, the value proposition, and they make an investment. However, having a theme is important from getting my attention perspective, right? It compresses maybe 20 words into 3, and it's much easier to describe in the subject line of an email if it's a cold call or a cold email or an introduction, right? So shorthands does help communication, like all shorthands. But in the end, when it comes to making an actual investment decision, just saying that you're on-demand blah, that barely registers in my wallet, right? Like, I still need to really go through the entire process, truly understanding the problem, the solution, and the actual value proposition, and then the business model.
Okay, so when we in the industry are talking about this concept, we have to kind of use a little bit of deference to think about it's, maybe we're also in a little bit of a bubble ourselves and getting excited about what may or may not be happening. Let me ask sort of a change of question a little bit. When we think about all these companies that are coming up and coming that are related to the world of load and on-demand, what I imagine is that there's going to be a need for a lot of support and infrastructure behind those companies to actually make them happen. And like for example, with Operator, I'm sure there's a little bit of Instacart, there's a little bit of Postmates behind them, there's a little bit of Uber as well probably that's happening behind the scenes to make all these things take place and for me to get my chicken parm at my house with just a text message. Do you imagine that we're going to start to see a sort of a halo effect with investment starts to go into places that are not exactly related to the on-demand economy but necessarily towards the support of it? Rick?
I think absolutely. And I think you're seeing it today just by each of these companies, starting to collaborate with one another and realize that, one, they are sharing a workforce in many cases. I know that was a theme that came up throughout the day today several times, just about, the ability to do almost universal ratings, which I think is a very interesting problem to go after because there's without question today a sharing that's happening in terms of the workforce. But if you're an Instacart, do you need to build an Uber as well too, or can you rely on somebody else who already has that workforce, who already has that network established, and to become a partner, an extension of your own business? I think you'll absolutely see that increasingly.
Yeah, and Rob,
One of the things we see in one of our portfolio companies, Dispatcher, which helps independent truckers, of which there are 200,000 of them in the United States, get directly to loads where somebody's trying to ship something from point A to point B. Today, that's a backward system done with fax machines and brokers. Well, now they're actually getting everybody connected via social media and smartphones. But what's interesting is the definition of whole product that they have to deliver, making sure payments get done, making sure that sometimes they can pay the truckers more quickly and they collect on the back end. So the value-added service that they'll provide, they'll have to find different partnerships in other parts of the value chain. And so the trucker, himself or herself, can get whatever they need, but all the players along the stack in between have been completely reshuffled from what it used to be. So this collaboration is a requirement, but it's a whole new set of players between point A and point B.
the collaboration is a requirement, but it's a whole different set of players. Tweetable right there. James?
Two things. First, I just wanted to say to you guys that LOAD was a very bold choice of an acronym for this category. But to share something we think about at Obvious when we think about LOAD, for us, it's kind of a double-edged sword, or there's kind of a love-hate relationship. The bright side of this is what I would think of as the flexibility economy. You hear a lot of stories of people that are driving for Uber, doing various on-demand services as a flexible employment to kind of backfill their seasonality of their day job. Maybe they're an artist, maybe they're a musician, and that's really cool. It helps them kind of load balance their work. The dark side is when we talked about, millennials going straight into load, what kind of safety net are they going to have around, health benefits, around building a career ladder, getting management training? What's going to go on their LinkedIn page in terms of what we think of as, employment that creates opportunity and upward mobility? So to your question about plumbing, I think there's an interesting opportunity to create service layers and training layers for this new economy. Could there be co-ops that provide, group health insurance at an affordable rate? Are there some new way to reinvent the pension plan for folks that are just working 1099 freelance? I think there's a big societal problem, and there could be some interesting entrepreneurial solutions there.
What I think is really interesting, and I'm not sure if it's completely related, but it seems as though we're starting to see a lot more experimentation on the whole concept of management and the whole concept of how we deal with these sorts of things. I think about Zappos and the way that they've basically completely blown up their entire matrix organization in order to go towards a very millennial-friendly type of structure where there is no such thing as management, and it's a very different sort of thinking.
Yeah, they use something called holacracy.
Holacracy. I was thinking holography in my head. I was trying to remember what it was.
Keep in mind that 25% of the staff chose to say that's not a good fit for me and chose to take the buyout. And so it became very self-selecting. And I think we're going to have to wait and see over the next couple of years as to whether the holacracy
where this actually
works or not.
But those were Zappos employees, regardless of your management structure. A load company, they're under attack right now. They're doing everything they can to not categorize the humans providing the services as employees, to keep them in a 1099 category, which means they have to go out of their way to not train them, and to not give them the kinds of things that typically an employer invests in in their workforce.
So here's a question for you then, James. We talk about people power and sustainable businesses. A lot of times when it comes to growing on-demand or load-type companies, and Uber comes to mind, you will have a P&L or a line item for regulatory issues, for legal issues related to how do we go and break all the laws and then still not have the laws be broken? How do we figure this out? And for Uber, it's been they've been able to have a huge chest of cash to be able to go and chase that. There is a little bit of friction that exists when it comes to addressing this particular issue. Is it a matter of we believe in the cause and so therefore we're going to go backwards and fight the good fight, or is it a matter of we see the bottom line is going to be positive in the future and it will be a good result, therefore the means are the end? Does that make sense?
Are you asking would we get so excited about a business that we would invest knowing that there'd have to be a regulatory fight, that maybe they're breaking existing laws today?
Right.
I think as investors, our job is to take risk, but we try to quantify and calculate that risk, right? And when I look at deals, I often make a list of what are the 3 miracles that have to happen for this company to succeed? Because there's always multiple crazy miracles. And you don't want that list to be too long, and you want kind of an idea that you can overcome them.
Right.
So I think a regulatory challenge wouldn't scare us away, but would probably be part of the decision matrix where we think about how easy or hard is that going to be to overcome.
And the atmosphere and the environment's changing quite a lot for the 1099 workers as well. You've seen more recently a lot more kind of intervention by the federal government around the classification of 1099 workers and W-2 workers. Even today, when I look at a company, I want to know that that is not a significant hurdle, right? That this business can be run as a W-2, vertically integrated, or as Chris Disson say, a full stack on a startup.
And so necessarily we shouldn't have that be a major point.
No, it's the fact that whether it's a marketplace of vendors and service providers and consumers, or it's a full stack startup where it's vertically integrated, as long as the business model makes sense, it doesn't really matter as much to me, right? And that's kind of the headline versus what's actually happening behind the scene, right? In the beginning of Uber, when they first launched into cities, they actually bought cars and hired people to go drove those cars, right? And it worked for them for a while, and then they decided to scale up with more.
And then in a few years, the 1099 contractors are going to be replaced by their self-driving cars, and that'll be a whole different conversation.
Yeah, so really you just have to kind of project out long term and really understand the fundamentals of the business and the unit economics of that business.
Rob?
I think there's also a difference as an investor when you say, okay, our entrepreneurs are actually going to go out and overtly break the law versus what I'll call strategic neglect.
Okay.
So if you look at StubHub, it was unclear when they started if secondary ticket sales were going to be legal. And they did a bunch of research on it with lawyers, and it was just unclear as to what it was going to be. And so they went forward with the path of, we're going to take that risk knowing that we might have to deal with it later. And so I think it's one thing when you take a calculated risk, as James was talking about. It's another thing, I think Exceed would have a lot harder time saying, oh, we know we're actually going to go out and break the law and ask for forgiveness, not permission. That's something you might do when you're trying to maybe try something commercially, but doing that with the government is a really, really risky thing. Bad idea.
Absolutely. We've got just a couple more minutes here. I actually want to just ask, I was going to ask a goofy question like what's your favorite app, but I'm not going to put you guys in that position. What I would really like to know though is obviously you guys are thinking about this from every facet known to man, and it'd be interesting to hear what are some open questions in your mind right now when it comes to the on-demand economy that haven't been really addressed, because we've talked about the machinery, we've talked about the business, we've talked about the economy of it. What really still hasn't been resolved that may take us to the next level, or do you think that we're in a good spot? James?
So many open questions. I mean, I think, so I'm not a broken record, I mean, my biggest one that I mentioned is, what's the sustainability of this 1099 workforce?
Okay.
And how do you balance the flexibility benefit with what I think are some of the clear negatives where, these individuals by definition cannot get training, support, health benefits, any of the kind of employer benefits, and is that sustainable for our economy in the long term? You asked about why this didn't happen 10 years ago. I think I could tell you why it didn't happen 7 years ago, because we were in a recession.
Okay.
And now the economy has been in a growth phase, and there's a lot more discretionary income, and unemployment's down. There are a lot of consumers that want to purchase services with a touch of a button on their phone, and so there's a whole bunch of services, companies delivering that. But what happens when that becomes the accordion economy? If the economy shrinks, then all those companies are going to shrink their 1099 workers.
They're connected linearly.
When their demand goes down.
Yeah.
And so how do we think about, how do we plan for that?
Sustainability.
I think is a big question in my mind.
Great. Will?
I have a more of a tactical issue that I'm seeing because I'm working with entrepreneurs all the time. The first generation of these on-demand startups really grew up around investing in Facebook advertising for CPI, cost per install ads. Right? And it was really cheap, and they spend a lot of money getting lots and lots of downloads, right? And some of them have good enough PR that they'll also be able to supplement that with kind of organics. Today, there's just so much noise, right? How many massage startups are out there, right? Probably 10. And how many CPI install ads can you do when it's a generic category that's really hard to target? CPIs now are between 10, if you're lucky, to up to $20. And at a practical kind of activation and retention rate, you really need to have lifetime values of close to $300 to $500 to make that work.
With a massage.
And for
that
massages,
takes you a whole
I don't know how
different
many
place.
people spend $5,000 a year on massages. I really don't.
Whoever they are, they're really relaxed.
They feel good. It's all good. Like Kobe beef.
The back feels great.
Yeah, so if I don't see a sustainable and differentiated kind of customer acquisition strategy for these on-demand startups, it's a non-starter, even if it's an interesting idea.
Okay, and so we're seeing a trend here. And Rob?
Yeah,
Rick?
I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think that one of my biggest fears is this Uberization of everything will lead to a massive pullback, right? And I know even amongst my own firm, it'll become harder for me to get the good deals done just because of this glut of companies that will get funded that have unsustainable economics. So everything that I'm looking at today, in addition to being worried about the 1099 issue and where that will happen with its own regulatory risks and concern, I think there is opportunity in there for third parties to build great training and sort of social net type of services for that workforce. I think that problem takes care of itself, so I'm less worried about that. I'm more worried about just everybody piling into the category, Uberizing things that don't need to be, and that creating more of a sort of a bad halo within the entire category.
There was a time when people were Grouponizing everything as well.
Sure.
And, I mean, we saw what happened with that. And so far I'm hearing to be continued ... Rob?
I'm actually not worried about the next couple of years or even the pullback that's coming.
Okay.
Because I'm old enough to have seen expansion and contraction several times, and it's going to happen again. Kind of like James was saying, I'm a little more worried about looking at about how we educate our children from elementary school to high school and into university, and what are the sustainable things that they can do. That I'm worried about a bifurcated economy of the few people who are top flight engineers and STEM students, everything else, and then there's the rest of everyone else. And so that kind of worries me a bit. And as a father of 3 teenagers who probably aren't on STEM paths, it's like I worry, will they be able to feed themselves and put a roof over their head, make a contribution to society? The flip side of it is I see the creativity of the kids, and I see the creativity of the things that they can do and come up with, that they're not encumbered by the past. And they can find ways to use the tools. I look at stuff that my son does as an artist, and I'm just amazed by what's possible. His ability to reach people on a countrywide or global basis, which couldn't be done before. And so I think I see more of the positive side of humanity, but I think there's going to be disruption along the way, and it will be uncomfortable. But I'm an optimist by definition. I have to be in this job, and I believe the next generation will figure it out, just like our generation did, and just like our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation did.
Rick?
I might just add one point in that I think, at least I think back over the last 6-9 months, most of the businesses that I've been pitched in this category are things that are designed for people with more money than time and providing solutions there. And when the reality is, in the world, there's a lot more people with more time than money. And I think going forward here, people will need to figure out how to build a business model to address those with more time than money at comfortable unit economics to really have something that's game-changing.